Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons and love are told. Go ahead and like, share with your friends and subscribe. I never imagined that a single afternoon could change the way I saw my own family forever, but it did. I remember it clearly, the sunlight streaming through the living room window, catching the shiny new bike I had gotten for my daughter, Lila, her bright eyes sparkling as she ran her tiny hands over the handlebars. I had worked extra hours to afford it, because she had been saving for weeks and deserved that small joy, and to see her happiness was everything to me. That day Mara, my older sister, barged into the living room without knocking. Her face was twisted in a way I had learned to recognize over the years, jealousy disguised as outrage. "What is this?" she hissed, her eyes darting to the bike, to Lila, to me. Before I could answer, she grabbed a hammer from the kitchen counter. I froze. Lila's little gasp echoed like a tiny alarm in my chest. Mara swung the hammer, and in one violent motion, the new bike that had cost me weeks of overtime was reduced to bent metal and shredded tires. Lila cried out, her tiny hands clinging to me, trembling, and I felt a wave of anger, disbelief, and protective fury that made my vision narrow to only Mara and the destruction she had caused. I had grown up with Mara like this, always the center of attention, always entitled, always defended by our mother, who I later realized had conditioned me to expect nothing but blame and resentment from her. Our mother, Joan, stepped in as if to mediate but instead defended Mara, muttering that Lila didn't need such an extravagant gift, that I was being wasteful, that I had somehow provoked this. I remember gripping Lila's hand and feeling her tiny fingers squeeze back in fear and confusion. The sheer audacity of it stunned me. My heart ached, not just for the bike, but for the realization that the person who should have loved her sister unconditionally had chosen destruction instead. Mara had always thrived on manipulating situations, twisting reality so she could claim victimhood, and I had been the scapegoat for years, the one blamed for everything she did wrong, the one expected to financially support her whims and still smile while absorbing her resentment. That day, however, I felt something shift. I had a calmness rise inside me I had never experienced before. Not the fiery rage that demanded immediate retaliation, but a quiet, icy clarity that something had to end. I knew then that this was more than a shattered bike. It was a breaking point in my life, a line that Mara had crossed so boldly that I could no longer pretend the old rules applied. Lila's tears blurred before my eyes as I held her close. I whispered softly that it wasn't her fault, that the bike wasn't destroyed because she did anything wrong, but because Mara allowed jealousy and spite to dictate her actions. I could see it in Mara's eyes. She was expecting me to erupt, to beg, to cry, to beg for peace, but instead, I said nothing more than a single precise sentence. It was never meant for Lila. The silence hit Mara like a cold wave. She faltered, the hammer lowering slightly, and our mother's mouth opened as if to argue, but I had already turned my gaze fully on them, my calmness unnerving. You could almost see the cognitive dissonance as Mara processed that her destruction had no weight, that her expected reaction from me had failed to manifest. In the years leading up to this, I had tolerated her tantrums, her manipulations, and her entitlement, always hoping that patience and love would eventually correct her behavior, always thinking that blood meant loyalty, even in the face of injustice. But that day I realized that love alone could not shield my family from itself. Mara's actions weren't impulsive, they were deliberate, and our mother's enabling had been a constant, corrosive presence. My mind flashed back to earlier incidents. Stolen toys, spoiled birthdays, her constant attempts to invalidate my parenting, to make Lila's happiness a source of discomfort for her. It wasn't just jealousy, it was entitlement, magnified by decades of our mother's favoritism. And now, as I looked at the mangled remains of Lila's bike, I felt a mixture of sorrow, disbelief, and surprisingly empowerment. I had reached the threshold where I would no longer tolerate this abuse quietly. I had learned to navigate Mara's emotional traps over the years, and this time, I knew the rules of the game were changing. I had discovered earlier that the incident which triggered Mara's wrath, the supposed breaking of her daughter Naomi's bike, was based on a lie. Lila had been falsely accused, and I had even contacted the manufacturer to replace Naomi's broken bike with an upgraded model, an effort that Mara immediately misinterpreted as a slight against her. I had planned to surprise Naomi with the replacement, thinking it would mend the small rift between the girls, but Mara's jealousy could not abide the gesture. And so, with a hammer and a fury she inherited from years of unchecked entitlement, she demolished what should have been a moment of joy for Lila. My hands still tingled from holding Lila tight as the hammer clanged repeatedly. The sound etched itself into my memory like a warning bell, signaling that everything I thought I knew about my family's dynamics was about to change. It was not just the bike, it was my boundaries being violated in the starkest possible way, in front of my daughter, in the sanctuary of my own home. And in that moment, I felt the first stirrings of a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. That I would protect my daughter at all costs, that I would stop enabling toxic behavior under the guise of family loyalty, and that I would reclaim the respect that had been denied to me for years. My mother tried to interject again, but I held her gaze and let the silence speak louder than any argument. Lila clung to me, crying softly now, and I whispered again that she was safe and loved. Mara, realizing her theatrics had failed to provoke the breakdown she expected, finally left the room, muttering threats under her breath, her hammer dragging against the floor in defeat. That afternoon, the house was quiet except for Lila's sobs and the wreckage of a new bike, and for the first time in years, I understood that calmness could be far more powerful than fury, and that a single carefully chosen sentence could alter the course of relationships that had long been dominated by manipulation and fear. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't try to reason with someone incapable of empathy. I simply stated the truth, that the bike wasn't for Lila. It was for Naomi. And with that, I knew the scales of control had begun to tip in my favor. I spent the rest of the day comforting Lila, teaching her that material things could be replaced, but dignity, boundaries, and truth were priceless. And in that quiet reflection, I felt the first wave of freedom from the constant burden of being the family scapegoat. My heart ached for Lila, yes, but it was also filled with an unexpected relief that for the first time, I had begun to take control, to shield my child from toxicity, and to stand firmly in my own truth. Mara's hammer might have shattered metal, but it could not break my resolve. And from that day forward, the rules of engagement with my family had changed. I had learned that protecting my child sometimes meant breaking the chains of outdated familial expectations, and that even one calm, measured response could carry more weight than years of yelling, pleading, or compromising. I held Lila that evening, rocking her gently, promising that no matter what, I would always be her safe place. And in that quiet moment, I knew that this incident, as devastating as it had seemed, had revealed a deeper truth. The power of calm, the force of boundaries, and the beginning of a life where my daughter's joy would never again be collateral damage in someone else's jealousy. The next morning, the air in my house felt heavy, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anxious, I felt resolute. Lila slept peacefully in her room, the events of the previous day still fresh in her mind, but for her, comfort came from knowing I was by her side. I poured myself a cup of coffee and thought about Mara and Mom, about the patterns that had been repeating for decades. Mara had always used anger and theatrics to control situations, and Mom had always enabled her, insisting I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, or that I didn't understand family dynamics. But yesterday I realized I did understand. I understood exactly who they were and how they operated. And I also understood that for the first time I didn't have to play their game. I had planned my response carefully. Mara had assumed the bike was a gift for Lila, her jealousy driving her to smash it. But it had never been for Lila. It had been for Naomi, her own daughter, as a replacement for a defective bike. I took a deep breath and went to the living room where Mom and Mara were sitting, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I could see their anticipation. They expected tears, explanations, maybe an apology. Instead, I smiled faintly and said, "The bike was never for Lila. It was for Naomi." Mara's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, searching for a retort that didn't exist. Mom's expression flickered between shock and irritation, as if I had broken some invisible law. I continued calmly, my voice steady, carrying the weight of someone who had finally decided to stop being a victim. "You two need to leave my house. And my life." That sentence landed like a hammer, heavier than any physical blow Mara could have inflicted. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't expect this. They didn't anticipate that after years of enabling Mara's behavior, after years of being blamed for every little thing, I would finally take a stand so firmly. They argued, of course. Mara claimed I was cruel, that I was punishing her for nothing. Mom insisted I was overreacting, that family should stick together through misunderstandings. I listened quietly, letting their words wash over me without taking hold. I had nothing to defend, no excuses to make. The truth was on my side. And then I did something that would change everything. I posted the security footage from the day of the bike incident in the family group chat. It showed Mara lifting the hammer, swinging it, and laughing when Lila's cries rang out. Mom appeared briefly, offering weak excuses instead of stopping her. The video was undeniable. Within minutes, reactions poured in from relatives who had long suspected that Mara was manipulative, that Mom's favoritism had warped our family dynamics. Messages of shock, of support, of disbelief flooded the chat. Mara went silent. Mom tried to justify herself, but the evidence spoke louder than any excuse. And I sat there, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief because finally the truth was visible to everyone, and sorrow because I realized this confrontation, this revelation, meant cutting off the people I had once called family. It wasn't easy. I had spent years financially supporting Mom and Mara, helping out with bills, paying for things Mara couldn't afford, and often sacrificing my own wants and needs for them. Yet my generosity had been met with resentment, envy, and blame. But now I knew I had reached the end of that chapter. I would no longer enable their toxicity. The day I posted the video, I also drafted messages to notify them that I was stopping all financial support. I wrote clearly and concisely, outlining that the support had always been conditional on healthy behavior and mutual respect, neither of which had been present for years. Sending those messages felt liberating but also surreal. They tried to twist the narrative, of course. They claimed I had cut them off because of the broken bike, painting me as a cruel parent who didn't care about family. But the footage proved the truth beyond a shadow of doubt. I didn't need to argue anymore. In the days that followed, Mara's attempts to manipulate others backfired spectacularly. The extended family began questioning her behavior, reaching out to me in private to express disbelief and support. I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because justice had been served in the simplest, calmest way possible, and sadness because relationships I had once valued were irreparably broken. Lila, however, thrived. She had learned something crucial from the incident, not just that toys could be replaced, but that truth and boundaries mattered more than pleasing people who could not respect her. I made a conscious decision to shield her from further manipulation, limiting interactions with Mara and Mom to the bare minimum necessary. Over the weeks, I rebuilt our home environment, making it a place of safety, calm, and love. I focused on creating memories with Lila that no jealousy or entitlement could destroy. Slowly, I noticed changes. Mara attempted to reach out to justify herself, but I refused to engage. Mom tried to guilt me, but I had grown stronger, learning that love does not require enduring disrespect. I realized that this calm, measured approach, posting the evidence, cutting ties, setting boundaries, was more powerful than anger or confrontation. It was precise, surgical, even ensuring that Lila was protected, that truth was revealed, and that the toxic cycle would not continue. In those quiet evenings, as Lila played safely with new toys, I reflected on the lessons from the incident. I understood that family is not simply about blood or shared history. It is about respect, safety, and care. If those elements are missing, boundaries must be drawn firmly, without apology. I felt an unshakable clarity that for my daughter's sake, and for my own, Mara and Mom could no longer occupy space in our lives. And so I continued to enforce those boundaries, calmly, without drama, without anger, but with an unyielding firmness that left no room for manipulation. My resolve became our shield, our new foundation. After the confrontation and posting the footage, life shifted in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The video quickly circulated among our extended family, friends, and even distant acquaintances, creating a ripple that neither Mara nor Mom could contain. Messages poured in from people who had long witnessed Mara's entitled behavior, confirming my worst suspicions. They had noticed, but no one had concrete evidence until now. The attention was overwhelming, but it also brought clarity. Mara's husband, Daniel, began to see the pattern of her manipulations in a way he never had before. Conversations he had dismissed as petty or trivial now seemed sinister. Eventually, he filed for divorce and sought custody of their daughter, Naomi. The irony was bitter but satisfying. Mara's own actions, fueled by jealousy and unchecked rage, had dismantled the family she thought she controlled. Meanwhile, I maintained my calm, refusing to gloat or respond to Mara's attempts to rewrite history. My focus remained on Lila, on creating a home environment free from fear, jealousy, and manipulation. I stopped all financial support to Mom and Mara, knowing that any resources I provided would be misused to fuel further resentment. The sense of relief was immediate and profound. I was no longer responsible for the consequences of their entitlement. I started rebuilding our lives quietly, focusing on stability, routines, and nurturing Lila's happiness. Weekends were spent biking in the park, reading stories, and planning little surprises to replace the joy Mara had attempted to steal. Lila began to understand that not everyone acts with kindness, and that protection sometimes requires firm boundaries. She witnessed me calmly enforcing the rules, seeing the power in restraint and truth, rather than shouting or retaliating. It was a lesson she would carry into adulthood, that dignity and love are worth defending. My relationship with my extended family shifted too. Some relatives reached out to apologize, others offered support, and a few remained loyal to Mara and Mom, refusing to acknowledge the truth. I accepted this, understanding that not everyone could see what was clear to me. The viral nature of the footage made it impossible to deny the facts, but it also meant navigating new tensions, clarifying narratives, and reinforcing the lessons I wanted Lila to internalize. I spent many evenings discussing boundaries, respect, and the difference between accountability and entitlement. Mara's absence became a quiet backdrop, her tantrums and accusations replaced with the peace I had longed for. The home felt lighter, safer, and more secure, allowing Lila to flourish without the constant shadow of jealousy or manipulation. My mother, Joan, initially resisted understanding the impact of her enabling, but with the evidence undeniable, she had no choice but to confront the consequences of her actions. I limited our interactions to necessary communication, never relenting in my boundaries. I discovered a new sense of confidence within myself, an empowerment rooted in calmness and clarity rather than anger. I had learned that enforcing boundaries and revealing truth could bring justice without drama, that protection of one's family sometimes requires a decisive severance of toxic ties. Weeks turned into months, and the fallout settled into a new normal. Mara's world had changed irreversibly. My mother adjusted to reduced access and influence, and Lila thrived in an environment filled with love and consistency. I reflected often on the lessons of that fateful day. The bike incident was not simply about a toy. It was a crystallization of years of entitlement, manipulation, and favoritism. By maintaining composure, presenting evidence, and refusing to be drawn into petty battles, I safeguarded not only my daughter but also my own sense of self-worth. Friends and even acquaintances reached out to share similar experiences, thanking me for demonstrating that calm, deliberate action could dismantle toxicity more effectively than anger or impulsive reactions. The clarity I gained became a guiding principle. Family is not defined solely by blood. It is defined by safety, respect, and the capacity for care. Those who consistently violate these principles must be met with firm boundaries. I found that peace did not come from revenge, but from standing in truth and prioritizing the well-being of those I love. My life, once clouded by manipulation and resentment, now felt like a place of growth, learning, and emotional safety. Mara's absence, though painful at first, became a relief, a removal of chaos that allowed the nurturing of my own family to take center stage. I watched Lila blossom into a joyful, confident little girl, her laughter echoing through spaces that had once felt tense and threatening. I realized that the ultimate revenge, if it can even be called that, was living a life of integrity, calmness, and security, demonstrating that toxicity cannot prevail when truth and boundaries are upheld. The viral video was no longer just a family scandal. It became a symbol of accountability, a story shared in our circles as a cautionary tale about entitlement, manipulation, and the importance of protective boundaries. I no longer feared confrontation because I had learned that calm, decisive action, coupled with clarity and truth, is more powerful than any outburst. In the end, I reclaimed my family's narrative, protecting Lila, reclaiming my own agency, and establishing a home where love and safety reigned. And for anyone watching, the lesson is clear. Family should protect, nurture, and respect. When it doesn't, boundaries are not optional. They are essential. By standing firmly in truth, I ensured that no one could harm my daughter or myself without consequence, and I found peace, clarity, and empowerment in that decision. Moral lesson. Family is not defined by shared blood alone. It is shaped by safety, respect, and care. When these elements are absent, boundaries must be drawn decisively to protect those who depend on you. Love is meaningful only when it is reciprocal, when it fosters growth rather than fear or resentment. Enabling toxic behavior perpetuates harm, while calm, deliberate action rooted in truth can dismantle manipulation far more effectively than anger or revenge. Teaching children to understand boundaries, integrity, and accountability equips them to navigate life with confidence and resilience. Material losses, though painful, are temporary, but the emotional safety and dignity of loved ones are priceless. Witnessing injustice without action reinforces harmful cycles, but courage and measured clarity can break patterns that have persisted for generations. Protecting oneself and one's family does not require cruelty. It requires honesty, firmness, and the refusal to compromise on core values. By choosing calm over chaos, truth over fabrication, and boundaries over enabling, we can create homes filled with security, respect, and love. Prioritizing the well-being of those we cherish ensures a life where joy, integrity, and emotional safety thrive, even in the face of past betrayals.